You open the fridge. Something smells off. You wrinkle your nose, pull your head back, and without even thinking about it, you already know. Not safe. Don't eat that. You never took a class on this. Nobody taught you the chemistry of spoiled protein. Your body just knew instantly before your conscious mind had even caught up. You probably think that reaction is simple. Rotten food smells bad, so you avoid it. Cause and effect. Nothing mysterious there. But the real answer is far stranger. That flinch in your nose is one of the oldest, most finely tuned survival systems your body owns. And buried inside, it is a secret your ancestors understood, used, and mastered for thousands of years. A secret that modern life has almost completely erased. Your ancestors didn't just avoid rotten food. They studied it. They learned exactly which kind of rotten would kill them, and which kind of rotten would keep them alive through winters that should have starved them. And somewhere along the way, in the space of only a few generations, most of us forgot the difference entirely. Let's start with the flinch itself. Researchers at Cornell University who study the psychology of disgust have found that the emotion isn't a vague feeling of unpleasantness. It's a highly specific, highly tuned detection system aimed almost entirely at one category of threat: pathogens. The smell of rot, the sight of visible mold, the sliminess of spoiled meat, all trigger the same ancient alarm, because for nearly all of human history, these were the clearest visible signs that a food was crawling with organisms capable of making you seriously ill or killing you outright. Disgust isn't squeamishness. It's a parasite-avoidance system wearing the disguise of an emotion. It exists in every documented human culture. It appears in children before they're old enough to be taught it explicitly, and it consistently targets the same narrow list of categories: spoiled meat, feces, bodily fluids, visible decay, across populations that never had any contact with one another. That kind of consistency doesn't happen by accident. It happens because it was carved in by selection pressure, generation after generation, for a very long time. Here's what makes it remarkable. This system had to be precise. Too sensitive, and your ancestors would starve, refusing every slightly aged, slightly sour, slightly unusual food in an environment where food was already scarce and calories were never guaranteed. Too relaxed. And they'd eat something that could end their life in days, sometimes through the kind of danger that gives no obvious warning at all. Certain toxins produced by bacteria in improperly preserved, low-oxygen environments, the kind responsible for botulism, can be present in food that still looks, smells, and even tastes completely normal. That single fact meant flinch reflexes alone were never going to be enough. Evolution needed a system fine-tuned enough to draw a hard line between dangerous decay and something else entirely. Something your ancestors eventually learned to create on purpose through observation, memory, and hard-won trial and error passed down as knowledge, not instinct. That something else is fermentation. And it changes everything about this story. Fermentation looks, to your nose and your instincts, almost identical to spoilage. Sour smells, bubbling, change texture, sometimes a smell strong enough to clear a room. But underneath that surface, something completely different is happening. In spoilage, harmful bacteria and pathogens multiply unchecked, releasing toxins as they go. In fermentation, specific, beneficial microorganisms, lactobacillus, certain yeasts, particular molds, take over the food first, and in doing so, they actively crowd out and kill the dangerous organisms that would otherwise move in. Fermentation isn't decay. It's decay, hijacked and redirected by an entirely different, cooperative form of life. Your ancestors couldn't see any of this. They had no microscopes, no germ theory, no concept of bacteria at all. And yet, across nearly every inhabited continent, independently, without contact with one another, human cultures arrived at fermentation again and again. Archaeologists studying pottery residues at ancient settlement sites in China have found chemical evidence of fermented rice and honey beverages dating back roughly 9,000 years. Separately, evidence of fermented dairy products has been traced to early pastoral societies in the region around the Caucasus and Central Asia, thousands of years before anyone understood what a microbe even was. Communities in the high Andes learned to freeze-dry and ferment potatoes into a preserved staple that could last for years in storage, a critical hedge against the crop failures that came with farming at extreme altitude. Coastal communities in Scandinavia developed methods of fermenting fish that could see a household through months without daylight or fresh catch. Entirely different peoples, entirely different continents, entirely different ingredients, arriving at the exact same biological trick through nothing but generations of careful trial, careful observation, and careful memory passed down. Think about what that process actually required. Someone at some point had to taste something that smelled exactly like danger and survive. Then do it again. Then notice, over years, maybe generations, which specific version of smells wrong, kept people alive, and even seemed to make them healthier, and which version killed them. That knowledge had to be tested against real consequences, refined, and then carried forward carefully enough that an entire community could trust it with their lives. It's part of why so many fermentation traditions come wrapped in strict rules, specific vessels, specific timing, specific rituals, passed down almost word for word. Those weren't superstition for its own sake. They were safety protocols encoded into culture because writing didn't exist yet, and a culture's memory was the only laboratory notebook available. Your ancestors weren't guessing. They were running the longest, highest-stakes experiment in human history, one meal at a time, and the results got compressed into recipes, rituals, and rules passed from parent to child for thousands of years. And it wasn't just about survival through scarcity, though that mattered enormously. Fermented foods let people preserve a harvest through winter, turn otherwise undrinkable water into something safer thanks to alcohol's antimicrobial effect, and unlock nutrients that raw ingredients couldn't easily provide. Fermentation predigests parts of food using microbial enzymes, which is part of why fermented dairy is often easier to tolerate than fresh milk for people with limited ability to digest lactose, and why fermented soy products can offer more accessible nutrients than the unfermented bean. Here's the twist that makes this genuinely strange. That old knowledge wasn't just food safety folklore. It was, whether your ancestors knew it or not, a form of medicine. Researchers at Stanford University School of Medicine ran a controlled study tracking what happened when people added a variety of fermented foods, things like yogurt, kefir, fermented vegetables, and kombucha, to their regular diet over 10 weeks. Compared to a group that simply increased their fiber intake, the fermented food group showed a measurable increase in the diversity of their gut microbiome and a corresponding decrease in markers of inflammation throughout the body. The fiber group, despite eating in a way modern nutrition advice usually praises, did not show the same shift. The specific bacterial cultures your ancestors were unknowingly cultivating in clay pots and cover jars were quietly training their immune systems, generation after generation, in ways modern medicine is only now able to measure and explain. So why did most of us lose this? Here's where the story turns uncomfortable. Refrigeration, industrial food processing, and mass-produced pasteurized products solve the problem fermentation was originally invented to solve, keeping food safe over time. And once that original problem disappeared, so did most of the daily reason to ferment anything. Within just a couple of generations in many industrialized countries, a set of practices refined over 9,000 years, tested against real death, passed down through direct instruction from elder to child, simply stopped being necessary, and so it mostly stopped being taught. Convenience solved the ancient problem so completely that it made the ancient solution feel unnecessary, even faintly embarrassing, an old-fashioned habit rather than the sophisticated biological technology it actually was. But your body didn't get that memo. Your immune system, your gut, your ancient disgust reflex, they're all still running the same software your ancestors built this whole system for. The instinct to flinch from decay is still exactly as sharp as it ever was. What's mostly gone is the second half of the knowledge, the half that knew how to walk right up to that line, on purpose, and turn a controlled version of decay into something that could feed and heal you. It's worth noticing how widespread this rediscovered category actually is once you start looking. Fermented sorghum and millet porridges have fed communities across West Africa for generations. Injera, the spongy fermented flatbread central to Ethiopian and Eritrean cuisine, relies on wild yeast capturing the grain before anything harmful can. Fermented tea leaves have been chewed and brewed in parts of Southeast Asia for centuries, prized as much for their preservation as their flavor. None of these traditions borrowed the idea from one another. Each community, working independently with whatever grain, milk, or leaf happened to be locally abundant, arrived at the same underlying solution: recruit a helpful microbe before a harmful one gets the chance. This is why fermented foods are having such a strange kind of renaissance right now. Kimchi, sourdough, kombucha, natural pickles, miso. It isn't really a trend in the usual sense. It's more like a rediscovery, modern science circling back with lab equipment to re-verify something entire civilizations already knew empirically, one careful, deadly serious taste test at a time, thousands of years before anyone could explain why it worked. There's a real cost to having lost the second half of this knowledge, beyond nostalgia for old recipes. Modern industrialized diets tend to run far lower in live, diverse microbial cultures than diets built around traditional fermentation, and researchers studying the so-called hygiene hypothesis have pointed to this broader shift, less microbial exposure across food, water, and environment, as one plausible contributor to the rise in immune-related conditions seen in industrialized populations over the past century. Nobody is arguing you should eat something that has actually gone bad, but the near-total disappearance of deliberately fermented food from many modern plates may have quietly removed a category of microbial training your immune system evolved expecting to receive. So the next time you open the fridge and something smells just slightly, unmistakably off, pay attention to that flinch. It's real. It's ancient. It's protecting you exactly as it was designed to. But somewhere in that same sharp instinct is also the ghost of a much older skill, the one that let your ancestors lean in close to that same unsettling smell, study it carefully, and learn precisely when to trust it, and when a controlled kind of route was actually the safest, smartest, most nourishing thing they could possibly eat. You open the fridge. Something smells off. And somewhere behind that flinch is 9,000 years of your ancestors quietly, carefully, learning the difference between death and dinner.